Ukraine AP. U.S. President Donald Trump said that he plans to speak by phone Monday with Russian leader Vladimir Putin, followed by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and various NATO allies, about ending the war in Ukraine. Trump said that the call with Putin will be about stopping what he called the bloodbath in Ukraine. Hopefully it will be a productive day, a ceasefire will take place, and this very violent war, a war that should have never happened, will end, Trump wrote Saturday in a post on his social networking site Truth Social. Trump's remarks came less than a day after the first direct talks between Moscow and Kiev in years failed to yield a ceasefire. Putin had spurned Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's offer to meet face-to-face in Turkey after he himself proposed negotiations in Istanbul, although not at level, as an alternative to the full and unconditional ceasefire urged by Ukraine and its Western allies, including the US. Watch, Russia-Ukraine peace talks fall flat with few signs of progress. Earlier Saturday, top diplomats from Russia and the US held the latest in a series of phone calls, shortly after US Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that the Vatican could be a venue for Russia-Ukraine peace talks. In Ukraine, a northeastern town declared a period of mourning after a Russian drone hit a bus evacuating civilians from front-line areas, killing 9 people, Ukrainian officials said. The strike came hours after the Russian and Ukrainian delegations left Istanbul, after agreeing to what would be the biggest prisoner swap to date between the warring parties. Zelensky faces a gamble as talks stall. The talks in Istanbul on Friday ended after less than 2 hours without a ceasefire, although both sides agreed on exchanging 1,000 prisoners of war each, according to the heads of both delegations. Ukraine's intelligence chief, Kyrylo Budanov, said on Ukrainian television Saturday that the exchange could happen as early as next week. But the Kremlin has pushed back against a proposal by Ukraine and its Western allies for a temporary ceasefire as a first step toward a peaceful settlement, and the parties remain far apart on key conditions for ending the fighting. Since U.S. brokered talks began in March, Ukraine's strategy has been to convince the Trump administration that Putin is unreliable, and that Kiev is serious about peace. The U.S. has expressed frustration with the stalled talks and threatened to withdraw if results aren't achieved. The political theatrics are underscored by stark realities on the ground. In a war of attrition against Russia's full-scale invasion, Ukraine's position is poised to grow weaker as time goes on, unless powerful sanctions are imposed against Moscow and the U.S. continues arms deliveries. Zelensky said that he had discussed the outcome of the talks with Trump and the leaders of France, Germany, Britain, and Poland. In an ex post from a European leadership meeting in Albania on Friday, Zelensky urged tough sanctions against Moscow if it rejects a full and unconditional ceasefire and an end to killings. Russian delegation head Vladimir Medinsky, an aide to Putin, said that both sides also agreed to provide each other with detailed ceasefire proposals, with Ukraine requesting the heads of state meeting, which Russia took under consideration. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov on Saturday held open the possibility of Putin holding talks with Zelensky, providing the agreed prisoner swap goes ahead, and if the Russian and Ukrainian delegations reached unspecified further agreements. Peskov also told reporters that Moscow will present Ukraine with a list of conditions for a ceasefire, but gave no time frame, or say what needed to happen before Zelensky and Putin can meet. A town in mourning. In Ukraine, 9 civilians were killed and 7 others were wounded when a Russian drone struck a bus evacuating people from Bilopolia, a town around 10 kilometers 6 miles from Russia's border, according to local Governor Oleh Ryhorov and Ukraine's national police. The Associated Press couldn't independently verify the reports. There was no immediate comment from Moscow. Zelensky described the attack as deliberate killing of civilians, adding in a post on the Telegram messaging app that Russians could scarcely not realize what kind of vehicle they were hitting. The local media outlet Suspiln said that the passengers on the bus were being evacuated from the town when the strike happened. Authorities are working to identify some of the victims, most of them older women. Local community chief Yuri Zarko called the day Black Saturday, and mourning was declared in the town through Monday. Zelensky lamented the missed opportunity from Friday's peace talks, saying that Ukraine has long proposed this a full and unconditional ceasefire in order to save lives. Russia only retains the ability to continue killing, Zelensky added. UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy said that he was appalled by the attack. If Putin is serious about peace, Russia must agree to a full and immediate ceasefire, as Ukraine has done, he wrote on X. Russia's defense ministry claimed its forces hit a military staging area in the Sumy region on Saturday morning, about 50 kilometers 30 miles southeast of Bilopolia, without mentioning any other attacks there. According to the Washington-based Institute for the Study of War think tank, Ukrainian forces have been inching forward into Russian territory in the Kursk region, just north of Bilopolia. Russia said last month that its forces had fully reclaimed the Kursk region, nearly 9 months after Kiev's lightning incursion captured more than 100 settlements there and promised to hand Ukraine a bargaining chip in possible negotiations. Ukrainian officials claimed fighting in Kursk was still ongoing, Joanna Kozlowska reported from London. Hanna Arayarova in Istanbul, and Lazar Semenai in Tirana, Albania, contributed to this report. President Donald Trump on Saturday said that he'll speak separately to Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Monday as he ramps up efforts to help the two nations reach a ceasefire. I will be speaking, by telephone, to President Vladimir Putin of Russia on Monday, at 10 a.m. Trump wrote in an all-caps post on Truth Social on Saturday, adding, I will then be speaking to President Zelensky of Ukraine. Trump said he would speak to Putin about stopping the bloodbath that is killing, on average, more than 5,000 Russian and Ukrainian soldiers a week, and trade. Hopefully it will be a productive day, a ceasefire will take place, and this very violent war, a war that should have never happened, will end, he added. Trump has urged Zelensky and Putin for months to reach a ceasefire deal to end the 3-year-long war. Ending the war was a key campaign promise for Trump during the 2024 presidential election cycle. Officials from Russia and Ukraine met in Istanbul on Friday to hold their first direct talks since the war began. The two sides reached an agreement for a prisoner swap but did not appear to be significantly closer to setting terms for a permanent ceasefire. Secretary of State Marco Rubio also spoke with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov on Saturday about peace talks, State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce said. Putin did not attend the Istanbul talks. Trump told reporters on Friday that he and the Russian president have to meet. He and I will meet. I think we'll solve it, or maybe not, Trump added. The president has for weeks escalated rhetoric against Putin, blasting him for striking Ukraine as U.S. officials tried to initiate talks between both sides. Vladimir, stop. Trump wrote in one April post after Russia bombarded Ukraine in attacks that killed at least 12 people. Trump met with Zelensky for a private conversation on the sidelines of Pope Francis' funeral in Rome in April. After that meeting, the U.S. president questioned Putin's commitment to ending the war in Ukraine, writing in another Truth Social post that recent Russian strikes make me think that maybe he doesn't want to stop the war, he's just tapping me along. Earlier in his administration, Trump and top U.S. officials, like Vice President J.D. Vance, targeted their ire about the ongoing war on Zelensky, with a late February White House meeting between the three men devolving into a shouting match. Last month, Ukraine, and the US reached a deal on an economic partnership between the two nations involving Ukraine's rare earth minerals. NBC News reached out to the Russian and Ukrainian embassies for comment. Istanbul, Turkey. A low-ranking Russian delegation arrived in Istanbul for peace talks with Ukraine, Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova said Thursday, while a Ukrainian delegation led by President Volodymyr Zelensky and including other senior government figures landed in the Turkish capital Ankara. Russian President Vladimir Putin was not part of the Moscow delegation, according to a list released by the Kremlin Wednesday night, prompting criticism from Western officials that the Kremlin isn't serious about the peace effort. Vladimir Medinsky, an aide to Putin, will lead the Russian team that will also include 3 other senior officials, the Kremlin said. Putin also appointed 4 lower-level officials as experts for the talks. Pope Leo XIV calls for peace in Ukraine and Gaza. Earlier this week, Zelensky challenged the Russian leader to meet in person in Turkey to talk about ending the more than 3-year war. Zelensky said he would travel to Ankara to meet with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and wait for Putin. Also in the Ukrainian delegation are Defense Minister Rustem Umerov, Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha, and the head of the Ukrainian Presidential Office Andriy Yermak, the official said. He spoke on condition of anonymity for security reasons as the team had not yet arrived in Ankara. Now, after 3 years of immense suffering, there is finally a window of opportunity, Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan said at a NATO meeting taking place separately in Turkey. The talks in Istanbul hopefully may open a new chapter. Tammy Bruce, proof needed. Putin serious about stopping the carnage. But Zelensky will sit at the table only with Putin, Ukraine's presidential advisor, Mikhailo Podolyak, said. Details about whether, when and where the Ukrainian delegation might meet their Russian counterparts are still unclear but is expected to be clarified after Zelensky and Erdogan meet, according to a Ukrainian official who requested anonymity to speak openly about the day's plan. TASS said that the talks were to take place in a presidential office on the Bosporus. Moscow offered talks instead of a ceasefire. Putin on Wednesday evening held a meeting with senior government officials and members of the delegation in preparation for the talks, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said. Defense Minister Andrei Belousov, General Staff Chief Valery Gerasimov, and National Security Council Secretary Sergei Shoigu attended the meeting, among others. Kiev and its European allies had urged the Kremlin to agree to a full, unconditional 30-day ceasefire as a first step toward peace. Putin effectively rejected the proposal, offering direct talks between Russia and Ukraine instead. The Kremlin billed Thursday's talks as a restart of peace negotiations that were held in Istanbul in the first weeks of the war in 2022 but quickly fell apart. Moscow accused Ukraine and the West of wanting to continue fighting, while Kiev said Russia's demands amounted to an ultimatum rather than something both sides could agree on. Bill O'Reilly, Putin respects no human being on this planet. Russia's delegation then was also headed by Vladimir Medinsky. Putin's proposal came after more than 3 months of diplomacy kick-started by US President Donald Trump, who promised during his campaign to end the devastating war swiftly. The Trump administration in recent weeks indicated that it might walk away from the peace effort if there was no tangible progress soon. Trump had pressed for Putin and Zelensky to meet in Istanbul but said Thursday he wasn't surprised that Putin was a no-show. He brushed off Putin's decision to not take part in the talks. "I didn't think it was possible for Putin to go if I'm not there," Trump said during a roundtable in Doha, Qatar. The US and Western European leaders have threatened Russia with further sanctions if there is no progress in halting the fighting. NATO ministers back Ukraine. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha met with U.S. State Secretary Marco Rubio and Senator Lindsey Graham in the Turkish city of Antalya late Wednesday night. Antalya on Thursday is hosting NATO foreign ministers to discuss new defense investment goals as the U.S. shifts its focus to security challenges away from Europe. Sybiha reaffirmed Ukraine's support for Trump's mediation efforts and thanked the U.S. for its continued involvement, urging Moscow to reciprocate Ukraine's constructive steps toward peace. So far, it has not, Sybiha said. On Thursday morning, Sybiha also met with other European foreign ministers, including his French counterpart Jean-Noël Barrot, who in a post on X reiterated the call for a ceasefire and the threat of massive sanctions if Russia doesn't comply. There's no deal here, Dem Republic says of Ukraine Mineral Compact. We're in a very difficult spot right now, and we hope that we can find the steps forward that provide for the end of this war in a negotiated way and the prevention of any war in the future, Rubio said Thursday. Finnish Foreign Minister Elina Valtonen, also in Antalya for the NATO talks, accused Moscow of not being willing to engage in a serious peace process. We have one chair empty, which is the chair of Vladimir Putin. So now I guess the entire world has realized that there's only one party not willing to engage in serious peace negotiations, and that certainly is Russia, Valtonen said. Barrot echoed her sentiment. In front of Ukrainians there is an empty chair, one that should have been occupied by Vladimir Putin, he said. Vladimir Putin is dragging his feet and in all evidence does not want to enter into these peace discussions. Associated Press writers Lauren Cook in Brussels, Ilya Novikov and Samya Kulab in Kiev, Ukraine, Dasha Litvinova in Tallinn, Estonia, Susan Fraser in Ankara, Turkey, Matthew Lee in Antalya, Turkey contributed to this report. Russia launched more than 100 shot and decoy drones at Ukraine in nighttime attacks, the Ukrainian Air Force said Monday, after the Kremlin rejected an unconditional 30-day ceasefire in the more than 3-year war. There was no response from the Kremlin, meanwhile, to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's challenge for Russia's President Vladimir Putin to meet him for face-to-face peace talks in Turkey this week. The United States and European governments have made a concerted push to stop the fighting, which has killed tens of thousands of soldiers on both sides as well as more than 10,000 Ukrainian civilians. Russia's invading forces have taken around 1/5 of Ukraine. In a flurry of diplomatic developments over the weekend, Russia shunned the ceasefire proposal tabled by the US and European leaders but offered direct talks with Ukraine on Thursday. Ukraine, along with European allies, had demanded Russia accept a ceasefire starting Monday before holding peace talks. Moscow effectively rejected that proposal and instead called for direct negotiations in Istanbul. U.S. President Donald Trump insisted Ukraine accept the Russian offer. Zelensky went a step further Sunday and put the pressure on Putin by offering a personal meeting between the leaders. France added its voice to that offer Monday, with French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot urging Putin to accept, though he repeated the European position that a truce must be in place before the talks. Russia's failure to join the ceasefire offered by Ukraine would bring further sanctions on Moscow, European leaders say. In Kiev, local people expressed a mixture of hope and despondency amid the latest peace efforts. Putin doesn't want a truce to halt the war because it will mean that he has lost, Antonina Metko, 43, told the Associated Press. That is why they are postponing it. And everything will continue in the same way. Unfortunately, she said. Vladislav Nerybetsky, 72, was more upbeat, saying the seeds of a peace agreement are being sown even though a difficult process lies ahead. So let's hope, he said. The Ukrainian government has tried to keep up the momentum for a peace deal started by the Trump administration. Ukraine wants to end this war and is doing everything for this, Zelensky said on Telegram Monday. We expect appropriate steps from Russia. The Ukrainian leader said he told Pope Leo XIV about peace efforts during his first phone conversation with the new pontiff. Ukraine is counting on the Vatican's help in securing the return of thousands of children that the Kiev government says have been deported by Russia, Zelensky said, adding that he had invited the Pope to visit Ukraine. In his first Sunday noon blessing as pontiff, Leo called for a genuine and just peace in Ukraine. I carry in my heart the sufferings of the beloved Ukrainian people, he said. In 2022, in the war's early months, Zelensky repeatedly called for a personal meeting with the Russian president but was rebuffed, and eventually enacted a decree declaring that holding negotiations with Putin had become impossible. Putin and Zelensky have only met once, in 2019. Trump says deep hatred between the sides has made it difficult to push peace efforts forward.